Okay, I quickly want to show you how you can use the pen tool to refine some of your objects. Like, I'll use this as an example. This is something that just sort of was put together. I'm not saying it's a great example. I'm not saying it's a terrible example. I'm just saying it's an example of something that has some places that could use a little bit of help. So one of the things that you'll notice right off the bat is that right here, where I'm sort of circling my cursor, you'll see that there's a little bit of a split area where these two things are slightly a little bit off. They're not touching, and it kind of draws your eye there, and not in a good way. And then it's got this other little thing that's happening at the edge. And so some of the ways that we might be able to just uh, remedy this and pull this out of the corner or the edge of the artboard so that our eyes can exit the picture plane and enter somewhere again, is that we can just take the pen tool using also the direct selection tool. So it's not just the pen tool that we're talking about, it's also like the direct selection tools that are about anchor points. So let's go ahead and do some experimentation with some of this. So I'm going to grab this direct selection tool, and one of the things you'll notice is that if I do that, I can just select this right off the bat. If I select the black tool and I select it grabs the entire group, and you realize that if you look over here in I'm going to lock this other layer. If you look in my layer 1, that's where all these objects reside, and you'll see that I've got clipping groups, and so I would have to double click to go into isolation mode, and so it grabs some piece and portion of that. So I can also just grab this white tool, and you'll see up here that it did go into the clip group isolation mode. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this icon, and I can zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see what's happening. One of the things that's happening is that it separates from this other object here, but it starts to touch the other object over here. And so this is that place, that little shim kind of that's drawing our eyes. So what we could try to do is, we could take this anchor point right here and just kind of drag it, and I'll drag it off the edge of the board like that, so that it becomes one, it looks like one object and they're combined. And then you see here that there's still a little bit of spacing, and so this is where I might take this anchor point and pull it down a little bit, trying to keep it still in line. And so these are the kinds of small refinements that you can make on your work so that they start to flow together better. And you can already see immediately how this is a little bit easier to look at. And you could also make some decisions if you wanted, if you felt like it was going to be a better refinement. You could make some decisions about making small modifications to the object to see what would happen. If you, for instance, if you came in here and you select this, and let's just say that we extend both of these. I'll hold down Shift, and I've got both of these points now, and I can drag them out, so that they come out here. And then if you wanted, if you feel like that changes the curve a little bit too much, if you look at these others, you could also come down and adjust the anchor point so that it more closely matches the way that it looked before. And so that might be something that you would want to do, where you're not dramatically changing the icon, but it might make a difference in the way that this whole thing flows together. So, and then there's some other pieces and parts like this one where it might be interesting to have this shape given the way that it is, or you could also potentially morph it, since all of these have like curved lines, right? Maybe this one would also flow better if it came up and around with another curved line. So you could select this object again, and one of the things you could do is you could put an anchor point right here. Let's grab this anchor, so add an anchor point. We'll add an anchor point right there, and then now what we can do is take direct selection and we can pull it up. But you see what I did was I just clicked, and so it didn't make it a curved point. If I want to change that to a curved point, I can select the anchor point tool. So that's if you do that like I did sort of by accident. And then what you see now is, and you can decide whether or not you like this, but you've got this curved line that kind of comes down and it flows here, and then now it kind of slips back around as a curved line. And so that might, that might be a little bit more pleasing to the eye in the composition. And you can make that decision yourself. And if that's the case, maybe this point needs to also change as well. And you can experiment with some of those kinds of things. Let's do that. All right, so you can see if that actually makes sense to do. We can deselect off of it, and that might look a little bit more interesting. And then the other thing is that maybe this point needs to come down to a different kind of point. So you could select this object and see what kinds of options you might have in terms of, like, maybe this is something you'd want to get rid of. Like, so maybe we can go over here, select the minus tool, and then get rid of that, and then this kind of comes down to a point. And you can make the decision as to whether or not you think that that is a little bit more interesting looking. And what it does is it activates this space a little bit more, so that this seems like a more fluid, this white space seems not like negative space any longer, but it becomes a more fluid, active space than it was before. Anyway, and there are lots of other little changes that I could go on and make if I wanted to try to make these adjustments. But I just wanted to show you that these are some of the ways that you can take objects and start to make adjustments to them. The other thing too is that because we have all these fluid curvilinear points, or curvilinear lines I should say, you might look at some of the notches and you might think that those are attractive. You might also want to see what they look like perhaps without them, or if it changed. And if you change it in one place, you might end up wanting to change it in multiple places. And you also might decide that it doesn't make any sense to do it this way. So it's kind of up to you. But like if I wanted to see what, for instance, this would look like if I changed it, I can select this object, and for this particular point, I could drag this down, and maybe I could have it meet this other corner, right? And so you could make a decision as to whether or not you think that that makes sense to do. I'm not sure that it does. I don't know that I think that that looks good. I can undo it. I could also see what happens if this point disappears, for instance, or just comes down. Oops, my bad. Let's select that one point. See how none of the other ones are selected now? And I can pull this down so that it meets this other point. All right, and you could make that decision. Not, like I said before, I'm not sure I like it, but we could also explore what happens. And you're just seeing sort of like an exploratory process, and this is kind of what I want you to go through, is in fact an exploratory process. I could also, I could pull this up here and see what happens if these two meet, right? And then now I've got this other kind of line that's happening. It kind of has a bump there, so maybe what I would want to do is change that so that it has a curved point type, and it may not look right, but you could adjust it. And let's do it like this. All right, and so that might look a little bit better, possibly, and it's not quite as sharp of a point. And so you can see how we took that original shape and we started morphing it a little bit, and then see now that that has happened, this sort of, in my mind, becomes a problem. Where it was kind of interesting before, this little piece, this little part becomes sort of problematic. So I could take this point and adjust it so that it comes over here. I could also adjust it so that it just maps to this spot, and see what happens if this maps to that spot, so that it ends up opening up, and then I can open this up so that now this has an out, right? And whether you like that or not is entirely up to you. Let's see if we grab that. Oops, let's try that again. And we can take this point and see what happens if we map it to a different place, and it kind of, yeah, so you can experiment, and that may or may not be something that you would want to happen. Like if it has a point that comes out, something like that, in which case you may want to close this one up a little bit. Let's see, it's this object, so we can take that point and pull it up. And so now we've got this shape that's kind of coming out. You can see the way that that comes out here, and then now we've got something up here that kind of has the same effect. And so you could look at this as almost like a snake or something that has a starting point and an ending point. And so if we took this, you could pull that out, or I don't know what, but anyway, you could really start to play around with some of this and see what you've got, and that starts to look like a letter S. But these are some ways that you can refine and explore and so on and so forth using the pen tool, using the anchor point conversion tool, as well as just the add and delete and the regular pen tool, and the direct selection tool. Okay, have fun.